Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Vorhies, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central and also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. Now, I'd like to start off our event today by thanking SAP for sponsoring today's event. SAP is an integral supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention and show our appreciation for some of our other recent sponsors, including Crowdflower, Databricks, Tableau, IBM, and Alteryx, to name just a few. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com. If you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide some very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Now, today's webinar is entitled Embedded AI, Machine Learning and Analytics, to be presented by SAP. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We have two presenters who I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A following the presentation. And this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. Now, I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, David Judge with SAP and Guilherme Rabello with the Innovation Branch of the Heart Institute in São Paulo, InovaInCor. Now, David is currently Vice President and Chief Evangelist for Leonardo at SAP. As a Leonardo evangelist, David guides product strategy and market awareness for digital innovation topics, including machine learning and automation. Now, prior to joining SAP, David was practice leader for artificial intelligence in the Emerging Business Accelerator with Cognizant and executive director for artificial intelligence market development at IPsoft. Now, Guilherme is Commercial and Market Intelligence Manager in InovaInCor, the innovation department of the Heart Institute in São Paulo. He's an engineer from the Polytechnic School of the University of São Paulo with prior experience in the telecommunications sector. And since 2011, he's been working in the health area to develop solutions in telemedicine and the innovation of medical products and processes. He's currently responsible for the InovaInCor Commercial and Market Intelligence Management line of business and is currently a member of the Innovation Executive Committee of Clinics Hospital Complex of São Paulo University. He's certified in patient blood management by the American Society for Advancement of Blood Management and speaks often at national and international events. So David, Guilherme, thanks for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. Now, new forms of systems of intelligence are emerging through embedded artificial intelligence, machine learning, and analytics. These data-driven systems of intelligence are enabling digital disruption and new business models. Now, many companies don't know what steps to take to become digital, where to begin their journey to digital, or how to be sure they won't waste money on innovations they can't implement throughout the company to drive better business results. So there's a massive opportunity to help companies take and complete this digital journey, not just to innovate, but to become scaled digital businesses. So in today's Data Science Central webinar, join David and Guilherme as they discuss how new technologies are driving digital disruption and the need for innovation. So David, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Thanks, Bill. We're delighted to be here, and thanks for hosting us. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is about Leonardo, and then we're going to hand it over to Guilherme to talk about his specific use case, having leveraged some of the technologies within Leonardo. But first, we want to be able to set the stage just a little bit. So the need to digitally transform, and that's a buzzword, we know, but to use technology to optimize your business and to create some new business models, it's never been greater. And you really don't have to look very far for examples of industries in change. And it's arguable that nearly all industries are impacted by the emergence of some of these new technologies. So it's little surprise that most CEOs see the next 3 years as more critical for their business than the previous 50. And companies that have effectively leveraged digital technologies are significantly higher revenue and profitability. Yet only 5% of companies self-report that they've turned digital into any competitive advantage. So like Bill mentioned, that opportunity is massive, and SAP wants to help our customers to digitize to take advantage of it. And so we've seen all the press, and I'm sure this audience lives this day by day and having to explain some of these terms to family and friends. And the analyst discussions in the press around how AI and machine learning and IoT and blockchain are poised to change everything. So this claim, it's really not hard to believe given these technologies have embedded themselves into a huge number of consumer-facing experiences. They're in our pockets, in our homes, and increasingly in our business competitors. And so these new systems really can enable us to draw some unprecedented value, first from data, but also to unlock some new business models and even reimagine existing business processes. So this cuts across supply chains, customer interactions, workforce experiences, and the list goes on. But the reality is that many companies just don't know where to begin or how to be sure they won't waste money. So SAP is bringing our industry and process expertise together with our software capabilities to help customers take and complete that digital journey. And so not just to innovate for innovation's sake, but to become scaled digital businesses. And so, innovation as a topic is pretty difficult, and frequently it can be too time-consuming and expensive. And it was really sort of, when we boil it down, there's 4 strategies that are commonly employed by businesses to achieve this. And the first is the sort of classic analysis paralysis. It's do nothing. And the fever pitch and hype of an overly enthusiastic press that's caused so much of this confusion. And some executives just throw up their hands and say, enough, we're going to sit out this cycle and wait till things become more clear and see how some of these technologies are being leveraged. But we feel that doing nothing will pretty much ensure that first mover advantage is lost to competition. So this option, in our view, isn't really an option. And so secondly, you could experiment in a sandbox. Take a whole bunch of smart people with rare and expensive skills, if the business can find them, and put them in a room and say, go innovate. So we know that the outcomes from this approach usually result in a lower hit ratio of success, and they can sometimes be disconnected from where the actual work is done, and can sometimes leverage technologies that aren't designed to scale to enterprise levels. So the plan to integrate solutions fully into operations is sometimes an afterthought. It's better than nothing, but it's certainly not optimal. And so you could launch a massive corporate-wide initiative aiming for a moonshot. Bold, multi-year, enterprise-wide initiatives are very expensive and can have uncertain outcomes. And again, the press is littered with some of these examples. It's pretty cliche, but failing fast and using rapid iterative approaches to innovation can ensure some incremental successes along the way, which can build credibility for the next project in your roadmap. Finally, you can implement tactically using a bunch of different point solutions. This approach can show some success, but usually fails to advantage a more impactful organization-wide strategy. And those can become a challenge to integrate and scale. And so we think that without a strong approach to innovation, it can be pretty difficult to find success. And so we've created Leonardo to take a systematic approach to innovation. And so what do we mean by that? We mean looking at some of these solutions in a more methodical and well thought out way, using considered solutions and services to help customers along that path. So using Leonardo, you'll be able to innovate using some of the latest technologies. We'll talk about that in a bit, without having to invest in huge in-house teams of experts in each topic. So you can focus on the business. And Leonardo is designed at the very beginning to be open, which I'm certain is not something that's expected of SAP, but we realize that a heterogeneous world is what we're living in now. So customers and partners can have some flexibility to both integrate innovation with SAP as well as non-SAP technologies. And Leonardo is also built to be modular, so you can take a step at a time to move up that curve with confidence that we can grow with you to some of the largest global implementations. And then finally, Leonardo solutions are designed to be extensible so that our customers and partners can build and scale their own applications on top of Leonardo and the technologies there. And so just to make it really simple, Leonardo combines together SAP's considerable expertise, so our business knowledge across 25 industries, 12 lines of business, all of the data that's been collected because of that, with innovation services, which are based on design thinking methodologies, and the fun, disruptive technologies that are all coming out of our cloud platform, things like machine learning, big data analytics, IoT capabilities, blockchain, et cetera. And we think this is a good recipe for success. So we want to start with the innovation services quickly. Our innovation services are leveraging design thinking methodologies, and it's become a bit of a standard by which companies find solutions and create value. And again, we don't have to look very far. Many companies are trying to be more human in their approach. They're trying to be more customer-centric, more user-centric, and think about experience rather than using technologies to being technology first and sort of showing up with a product and trying to find the problem that fits it, rather than focusing on real end users' needs and optimizing business processes around that. So you may not know, SAP has actually received more than a dozen design recognitions from some pretty prestigious organizations, including Red Dot Awards, Fast Company Innovation by Design. And we almost view design thinking as a return to form. When you listen to our chairman speak about the foundations of SAP, it actually started with a bunch of guys leaving IBM to form a company. And their early successes came from routinely sitting alongside users, real users, to design software that helped out their day-to-day job. So this is a customer centricity that we're bringing at the very beginning part of Leonardo, which is to focus on that user and that user problem. So the engagement process moves pretty rapidly. We're talking about weeks, not months. So when you engage with us, we're moving quickly from brainstorming, looking at your ideas, thinking about our ideas, looking at the business problems, and then pushing that towards a tangible blueprint. So first we started by focusing on those business problems and using rapid prototyping to arrive at a real solution to a real problem that's been pressure tested with real users. Once we are pretty confident that we found a viable and feasible solution, it's also desirable with the end users, we're creating an integration blueprint so that you can be confident that the solutions will scale and will coexist with existing technologies and the existing business landscape. And of course, the numbers have to work out too, both at small and scaled scenarios. So we're building a business case with you, and we'll match that to the prototype to ensure that we've got a strong ROI and strategic value to move forward. I also want you to bear in mind that this is also something relatively new for SAP, is that we're approaching this with fixed price and fixed duration services that really reduces companies' risks of a bad bet and can eliminate cost overruns. And so we want to come back to the technology. So we talked a little bit about the services, and so the technology is one of the other big pieces to this. And we've got a lot of buzzwords on the slide here, so we want to explain why these technologies. Simply put, they're some of the most promising and interesting technologies that are available today. They're buzzwords for a reason. But putting them to productive use can be really hard. And it's not just about one technology. Machine learning doesn't exist in a vacuum without data, or business process for that matter. And so it's really about how they all come together to solve an interesting business problem. And so but the challenge is that there's close to an infinite number of possible combinations, and not all those combinations will be good ones. So we're looking for ideas specifically that can scale and can deliver solid ROI. And so, all of these are radiating out of Cloud Platform, as you see below. We've brought them together via our innovation services so we can leverage them together when they're most powerful. And the other key thing to keep in mind is that these technologies will potentially change over time. If we flash forward 10 years, it's not likely we'll still consider today's technologies and techniques to be very, very interesting. In fact, some believe that there's some things on the horizon like quantum computing that could change just about everything. So the fundamental innovation approach of Leonardo is what we're focusing on here. And that's likely to still be very relevant even though the technologies have advanced. So we don't want to get too caught up in what we're actually including inside of Leonardo. It's, in fact, sometimes it's interesting to think about what we might even be working 5 years from now. So these are the basic building blocks, sort of the ingredients into the recipe that we can integrate together and to meet some unique needs. And so all of these are, as I mentioned, radiating out of Cloud Platform. Cloud Platform, the SAP Cloud Platform enables at-scale integration. And so we've been able to scale to very, very large implementations. Some of the largest companies on the planet run us. But it also provides flexibility of the infrastructure layer, so the IaaS layer, either ours or AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform, whichever happens to be right. And we recognize that heterogeneous environments are the new normal. Open, standards-based, and extensible architectures are very important. And so you can extend your existing on-premise apps into beautiful mobile-ready apps. You can connect data and business processes together regardless of who built them and where they're deployed. And so, just by the numbers, we have over 7,000 customers on this, so it's been battle-proven and we've scaled it. But as a platform, we'd also have to have all of the other things that you'd expect of a platform of this size available, things like security and analytics, mobile capabilities, integration capabilities, and an ecosystem of technology partners. So no one company can do everything. But what we can do is bring some of the best together under one platform where it makes it easy to enable our customers' innovation aspirations. And so if we're going to scale these benefits from any of these technologies, we'll need the ability to go from sort of a departmental deployment to an entire enterprise. And the key message here is that it just can't stay in a corner and it can't be limited to just one use case. But we do need to work with you to advance in an agenda that's in a pace that's consumable but ambitious. So we're flexible in our approach, either using some pre-baked combinations of technology or treading new ground via innovation services. So you can choose services either from us or some of our global partners. And either way, we're going to share some of the project risks with you through the fixed price, and simple licensing and pricing, and low-cost accelerators. And so that's actually a topic I want to talk about. We're really focused on how we can best enable customers to rapidly adopt and create some ROI around this. So we've introduced a concept called an accelerator. And an accelerator is, put it simply, a combination of expertise, data, software, and our services to get a job done. And so the way to think about this is that they're pre-baked for an industry process. They're packaged to about the 80% done mark. And we'll work with you to close the gap to make it specific to your process, your technology environment, and your users. And so we've designed this to allow sort of one step at a time. So they'll be sold at a fixed price, time-bound to deliver in 8 weeks, so there's no surprises. We're also offering that flexible open approach that I've mentioned that allows you to work with us on something that might be entirely new and a new need for any industry or business requirement. And so working with one of our 25 industry business units, we identified customers that had already realized some success working with us, transformed those use cases into more repeatable solutions. So to begin, we developed 10 industry innovation accelerators across retail, consumer products, manufacturing, sports and entertainment, utilities, et cetera. And so over time, what we're doing is we're building a rich portfolio of those accelerators that will address common business use cases across just about any industry. And so to enable this, we've created a global network now of Leonardo centers where we have the ability to showcase some of these innovations and also provide learning and enablement resources for customers and partners. They're really cool spaces. So, of course, there's a physical space that enables this type of work, but there's also very tangible showcases, touch and feel, take a look at, play with type use cases that bring Leonardo to life. So we started with 4 centers in New York, Paris, and Bangalore, and then Sao Leopoldo quite recently, and we're planning to add many more centers very soon. And so we have just a couple next steps for you, and then one plug to follow. First, to learn more about Leonardo, please visit sap.com, and so you'll be able to see a whole bunch of other examples and information and some of our viewpoints around these technologies. You'll also be able to join our community of experts, a bunch of webinars like this and best practices and a lot of community resources that we're making available. And then finally, if you are one of our customers already, give your account exec a call and schedule a one-day workshop with us where we can get started and take a look at some of the problems that we might be able to solve together. And then we've got a pretty great event coming up in Chicago on November 2nd. And at Leonardo Live, our intent here is that you'll be able to walk away with a game plan instead of just marketing brochures. And you'll be able to experience some of the technologies that I mentioned before rather than just hearing about them from me. So in short, we'll hope you'll get started innovating instead of just talking about it. So you'll get some hands-on experience with IoT and machine learning, analytics, et cetera. You'll hear from some more of our customers as well, folks like Caterpillar and UPS and HP, Bosch, McKesson, and Monsanto, and many more. And you'll be able to hear some really interesting speakers, and one of my favorites, Andrew McAfee from MIT, who's written a really great book, best-selling author Walter Isaacson, founding partner of Easton Media, Nita Easton, and some news correspondents and CNN contributor, Biana Golodraga. And forgive me, Biana, if I misspelled or mispronounced your name. And with that, we wanted to hand it over to Guillermo to talk through and hopefully put some substantiation behind the claims that I just made.
Okay,
Guillermo, over to you.
Thank you, Dave. Yes. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I'm currently speaking from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And after this great explanation from Dave, I would like to talk about how SAP Leonardo helped my hospital, the Heart Institute in São Paulo, to use technology to save lives. In fact, we live a very challenging reality in our hospital environment. As we all know, because we are a patient at some point of our time, the medical field is very challenging, especially on complex hospitals. So we depend a lot on technology, but also on human skills. And because of that, sometimes the human skills are one of the problems, like the cause of deaths. We couldn't imagine that people could die from medical error on the size of the situation today. For example, in U.S., it's the third cause of deaths in U.S., just behind heart disease and cancer. But this situation is not an American challenge. It's also in Brazil. A recent studies showed that almost 500,000 people die in Brazil because of patient treatment mistakes. That's not a medical error itself. Sometimes it's the lack of information or misjudgment on the course of action because you don't have the right data, or the devices or the equipment do not talk to each other and mislead sometimes the doctors to some action. So this is a burden that we have today worldwide, and everybody, everywhere, is challenging how we can change that scenario. So patient treatment mistakes that can kill more than the disease itself is unavoidable death. And that's where we came to see how we could provide, through technology, the digital transformation that the medical field and the hospital environment needs, from the analog world with all the paperwork and so on, to a digital environment that the providers, the caretakers could engage on a better and more efficient way with the patients. Most of the people sometimes think on the medical field that to engage with better technology is usually expensive and slow. And I'll say that there are some reasons for that, for them to think that it's expensive and slow. But also, they understand that technology saves lives. So that's why hospitals integrate a lot of devices, a lot of hardware, software, and it's a natural environment, very challenging one, where you need to integrate the equipment from different vendors. And most of the time, the workload goes to the doctors or to the nurses to make these devices and systems make sense because they don't talk to each other. So the collaborator, the medical doctors, the nurses, they sometimes have the burden to integrate the data on their minds. And this is very challenging because the doctors, we that work at hospitals, we cannot see ourselves as superheroes. We are like anybody else, and the overload that we can take from our daily jobs to provide a more effective way to treat patients, this is a very good goal to have. So in our hospital, we mapped a lot of the challenges regarding how technology interacts with the environment in a hospital. We are a complex hospital for heart and lung diseases, tertiary hospital, and also a medical school hospital. So there are a lot of areas where we could improve. We belong to the São Paulo University complex. That's the largest medical complex in Latin America, as you see on the screen. And the heart hospital is the one on the right. We have around 450 beds. 1/3 of that belongs to critical patients. So we have around 140 beds for ICU patients, intensive care. Many ORs, operating rooms. 80% of our patients belongs to a public payment service, so it's paid by the government. Just 20% is from the private sector insurers. So we have a hybrid situation where we need to provide high qualified medical service that also needs to attend the social service because we are funded in the majority by the public. And in that scenario, many of our workflows are very intensive. Intensive because we don't have interoperability between the equipment and the workload that the nurses and the doctors need to have. This is just one example of the intensive care unit workflow, how the nurses needs to go from bed to bed, sometimes collect data, write down on a paper, and move on after she ends the shift, sits down, and she needs to transcript the information to the medical record software, and then sometimes the doctor will review that information. So this consumes a lot of time, a lot of manpower, and on the analysis we did with SAP team, we saw that on one of the ICU departments, we were expending more than 1,000 hours per month just collecting manual data, just going down from bed to bed and writing down the information. So zero integration between the equipment and the medical record system. We have a very high occupied beds rate, so this means that we need to get more people treated well so we can turn over the beds and get more people treated at the hospitals. So all that scenario put us on a challenge with SAP to see how we can overcome that situation with the better use of technology. So we balance also the technology with the human components, so we cannot pass to the medical doctors, to the nurses, to the physiotherapists, the overload and the workload to make integration of technology. They need to be served by the technology, and that frees them to do their human service, that's to treat the patients. So humanized and safe environment means that we are putting technology to serve and not to drag them from their work. Also, we need to improve through technology patient experience. They want that. They want the contact with the provider of the service, the doctor, and so on. So we don't want to rob the time that the medical doctor or the nurse needs to take to listen and to interact with the patients. And sometimes to implement things on hospital environments, because we are a very busy environment, we have very short deadlines and low-cost budgets. So that's just one extra challenge we have to face. So we proposed to SAP that we could provide on a very short time, a 6 weeks time frame, one prototype that could implement a solution for the intensive care unit. And we had the support from SAP lab in Latin America that is at São Leopoldo location, as they mentioned. They have there a full staff that people are very knowledgeable about the Leonardo platform. And we entered last year on an event they call SAP Innoweeks, where they put together the customers like us, university people where they are located, their own staff, and technology partners to create concepts and to challenge how they could do better. So we get into this event with the intention to integrate our ICU monitors that do multiparametric measurements on the patient using a medical standard called HL7 that is a protocol that extracts data from a medical device. And we try to integrate that device, the monitor, with the SAP platform so we could do intelligent analytics. So we have to do everything from scratch. There is nothing like that in the market the way we wish it and the way we propose it to SAP on this challenge. So we did a design thinking to create empathy, and to do that, it was a very interesting experience because we had to create empathy between our medical teams at the ICU department and SAP team. So the first step was to bring all the doctors from the intensive care to understand what we were going to do. They understood and then they were very thrilled. Then we brought the SAP team to live 2 days at the hospital so they could understand, interview, and do everything that they did on the design thinking and extract the excellent ideas that the whole staff provided to them. And after that, we could rapidly prototype what we called the Smart Care Unit solution. That is a different layout, but also different processing of the data. And Leonardo was key to that because usually we don't have all these pieces and parts on one single stop. We need to integrate from different vendors. But when we saw Leonardo, we said, well, we can do one-stop shop here and put all the pieces, the blocks, and like David said, Leonardo provides innovation, integration, and scale. So we integrated through the design thinking elements of machine learning, data intelligence, big data, Internet of Things to connect the monitors to the SAP platform, and also the module of analytics because we need to output the data that the doctors really needed to make a decision. So that's the architecture we used during the 6 weeks. We provided a multi-parameter monitor for the design. We extracted through a middleware and device on an IoT base the HL7 data package out of the equipment, and we provided the data package through the platform so the connected health platform could digest the vital signs, patient data that we needed to put there. We also considered integrating some voice commands, and that is the way we saw the system solution come to life. So we call it the Smart Intensive Care Unit system solution. And basically, these are just a showcase of the screen where we have on the left 12 patients, quick monitors. This is just one single screen that the doctors at the ICU bench could see, or the nurse. And depending on the data analysis, they can indicate through a yellow light or a red light if some changes on the parameters are very critical, not because they are critical on the parameter itself, but how they correlate with the other parameters. And if some patient in specific needs to be checked, the doctors could highlight or pinpoint the data on one of these 12 patients that are monitored at once. And they are individual signs with all the risk scores that indicates how serious is his condition, what's the trend, the data of his drugs and so on come to life. So the doctor do not need to go through all the patient medical record screens. He has at one single screen. And this provides a faster process for him to make a decision, especially for an intensive care patient that sometimes minutes make difference for an intervention. So from the previous workflow that you saw, we could reduce a lot of the workload for the nurse mainly, but also for the doctors to make a decision. It's much simpler now. because we are extracting the data and we're leaving the doctors and the nurses to do their own job. What was the impact we forecasted on our case? First, 85% reduction on manual data collection. This is huge workload that it takes out of the nurses mainly. Okay. Also, we increased the beds availability with 7% without putting any more beds there. It's just making it more efficient for you to do a turnaround. We reduced the amount of time that the patients are at ICU because the decisions are now possible for you to make them faster, and sometimes it's critical for them to have a better outcome. And also, we increased the free time that the nurses and medical staff could interact with the patients. So this is humanization at best, okay? And also we could saw that the full integration of medical device through the right protocol could be done. And this is not brand dependent. This is just smart thinking dependent. We need to do. So as a bottom line, we understand that data without the right process is like an opinion. So if we don't have the data, we're just like a regular person with an opinion. And the doctors could not have opinions. If they do have opinions without the right data, that's where medical errors happens. And that's why we want to use this type of technology like SAP Leonardo to provide a better care, reduce the avoidable deaths, and improve the outcomes of the patients. That's basically what we saw. And that's part of the team that helped us to achieve the results. Luckily, during the contest of the SAP Innoweeks last week, our solution was granted the best award of the design, interaction, and IoT. And that was very fruitful and interesting collaboration with SAP team. So that's it. Back to you, Bill.
Hey, David, Guilherme, thanks so much for that excellent presentation. So we'll get started with today's Q&A session, and I want to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a lot of questions that have come in during the presentation, and we'll do our best to get through them all in the time remaining. So during this Q&A session, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for both David and Guilherme in case you'd like to contact them following today's webinar. So let's get started. David, I was very intrigued that this is both process and technology, and these systems are going to be so important in the future. How do you and SAP see these systems changing corporate cultures, and how will this impact existing subject matter experts in each line of business?
Yeah, Bill, that's a great question. So first, it behooves us all to believe and to understand that this is very early days with the adoption of some of these technologies. And I think Guilherme's example is a great one where it's we can really make it about the users. We can make it about the people that are trying to get the work done and to reduce friction on their day-to-day lives. You know, we've become accustomed to, you know, certainly from a consumer perspective, about things being very easy. But the challenge is that when we go into our work environment, sometimes it's anything but that. So, you know, as shown by what Guilherme spoke about, it's early days, but the initial results from most of our customers seem to show that it's mostly about how we can augment our users with augmented intelligence. You know, automate the least interesting parts of the business process or their role so that the employees can spend more time on the tasks that are important. So in Guilherme's example, it's about a nurse providing care rather than shuffling data from one person to another and being sort of a human aggregator of information. And allowing them to be the expert, which is, you know, not has little to do with stitching together various systems because they haven't been stitched together by our IT environments. So for me, and I think for SAP, it's about enabling people to become more expert and spend more time on the jobs that they're good at, and offloading the repetitive and mundane tasks to machines, and particularly ones that they're good at.
Well, thanks. That's a great answer, and I really appreciate your use of the word augmented intelligence. I think that's a lot more informative than artificial intelligence. But the audience is asking, is there any difference between what you've referred to as embedded AI and regular AI?
Well, I mean, first it behooves us to sort of define what AI means. It's almost as meaningless as cloud was about 10 years ago, right? So again, very early days. So artificial intelligence can mean anything like the red-eyed robots from Terminator, or as some like Nick Bostrom might say, around a general intelligence. So that's not what we're interested in from a business perspective. That's certainly a futuristic topic that behooves us to think about, but it's not relevant for businesses right now. So we think about AI as a narrow AI, and specifically around what machine learning and some of the other more interesting technologies we've talked about today can accomplish. It's really about pulling all those bits of data and the systems together, and to be able to, what we could have done previously with traditional automation technologies, getting to about the 80% mark, closing the gap on the next 20% that was previously unattainable because it was more fuzzy or more difficult to understand. So machine learning helps us to close those gaps. So we mean quite literally that AI will be embedded inside of the process, and the processes will necessarily get more efficient because of that, and again, it will allow our users to spend more time on the things that are value add rather than mundane.
Well, David, thanks for that excellent answer. Guilherme, the audience is really interested to know some of the details about your work with the SAP team, and so let's start at the very beginning, because you all both talked about bringing kind of preformed ideas that were, say, 80% complete. So during that first interchange with the SAP team, was this monitoring system actually your highest priority, or was that the best one that was available, or how did you come to select that particular project in conjunction with the SAP folks?
Good question. Well, first, multi-parameter monitor is a device that you have almost in every hospital for critical patients, and for sure in every ICU. So we decided to select a good case of a device that, if we could prove the concept that this single device that provides critical information, so it's the heart monitoring, saturation of oxygenation, heartbeats, and so on, this device could make a change if we integrate it the right way. And so the decision of the monitor was not because of the protocol that it had, but because what it could represent, even on the imagination of the medical community, is if we can make a multi-parameter device talk the right way, it can provide much more than just monitoring information. It can provide insight, and this insight is very useful for the right decisions on the right time. So that was the first point. Second point is we had to provide to SAP a challenge saying we need to make a change on the perception for the manufacturers that they need to provide the right tools for us to integrate the data on the software analysis, because they want to provide sometimes the hardware and an associated software to just monitor, and this is not the right solution. So we did overhauling thinking of what we had to do and what we wanted to prove as a concept and physically if it could work, and that's the way we went. And fortunately, it proved correct.
Well, Guilherme, thank you for that excellent answer. And now in the next step, as you were developing the prototype in conjunction with SAP, what was the division of labor? The audience is interested to know, how much of this was SAP's labor and how much was your own technical staff involved, and is that typical of this type of project?
Yes, that was another doubt we had is, could we do in 6 weeks this challenging that for us was sometimes thought impossible. So we mobilized 20 people from the hospital, from the professors, the head of the ICU division, the residents, everyone that we understood that was critical to get involved. So it was 20 people from our side, the IT department and so on, and the innovation department that led the process. And from the SAP side, it was 30 people on the team from university, college students, SAP Innovation that was led by Daniel Duarte, that is the innovation director from SAP Labs in São Paulo. So there was a bunch of people that was dedicated to that, so 30 people. So the combination of those, around 50 people, could make this happen because the interaction was fruitful, multidisciplinary. It was a multidisciplinary engagement. And also we had the support from one of the manufacturers that provided the equipment. So they helped us also on understanding the device. So that was key, to have everybody on the same boat.
Excellent. Quite a group effort. Now, the audience is also asking, you showed earlier in your presentation a slide that showed it was either goals or results, and the audience wasn't sure. When you showed those percentages of improvement, were those what you expected, or were those what you actually achieved? And did they differ?
Yes. Well, to be honest, that were the results that we achieved, okay, on the test that we did. So when we did the pilot to test the solution, compared to a regular shift of the nurse to collect the data, that was the results, and the extrapolation we measured. If we had to compare to a regular month, that was the real data, okay? And we were surprised. I'll say to you very honestly, kind of that it was beyond what we expected. We could not, we could not help to see that 85% reduction on time to collect data is humongous, okay? And when we saw that, to say, hey, we need to change something else. So we are losing a lot of quality time from our staff just to do interoperability things that the technology were not doing because nobody had the guts to do it. So because of these results, now a lot of discussions internally at the hospital are going on, say where we can achieve something else like that. So that's a revision of our quality, and also because we saw that technology put in the right way could provide these excellent numbers as a result.
Those were indeed really remarkably great improvements, and I'm sure everybody was impressed. David, in the Leonardo process, how does Leonardo take into account the overall business strategy, to map to the business strategy, or is this really just about individual innovations?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I want to stress that, again, the technologies are interesting, but they're if they're not mapped to the business strategies you've mentioned, they're not going to hit the mark. And I think Guilherme's example is a critical one. If you notice the makeup of the team that he talked about, that he brought to the table from the hospital, what included nurses, it included strategy people, it included doctors, the people that are actually using and operating the process. So I think it's not hard to see that if those people hadn't been there, that the chances would have been higher that the solution wouldn't have been as tremendous in its outcomes. So we think it's critical that it gets mapped both to the business strategy from a broader perspective, but in the specific use case that we're bringing the real users to the table. You know, that's something that's quite central to the topic of user centricity and design thinking in general.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. And I know from my own listening to this, the part that particularly struck me was SAP's agreement or strategy to do a very rapid fixed cost engagement. And this worked out very well for the hospital. The audience is asking, gee, can you tell us some other use cases that you've already done, focusing particularly on the ROI and time to value?
Sure. So a couple of examples. Recently added to our machine learning topic is something that, again, I find very interesting, is called conversational AI. So what we've done is we've taken again, a machine learning approach towards understanding natural language. So if you look anywhere within, again, the press talking about chatbots and virtual assistants, we've created an ability via the platform, again, to be able to create our own. And also we have something called Copilot, which sits alongside all of the SAP technologies. So we worked with a company called Bayer, and I'm certain that you've used some of their medicine at some point in your life. And they had wanted to try to find ways that they could optimize and create a bit more efficiencies inside of their procurement processes internally. And so one of the things that was identified as a part of design thinking was that the administrators inside the business were spending too much time trying to find information. So using some of our conversational AI capabilities, we were able to create a very simple natural language interface that allowed for those teams to just ask a simple question and get some simple answers out of the systems. And so we think that that's a pretty big, it has a pretty high potential in the future. And so another one, Trenitalia, which is the largest national railway within Italy. This is an IoT use case. They had used our connected technologies to be able to both bring in data from the sensors that were inside of their trains, to be able to collate it and then apply machine learning to perform predictive maintenance. And so they were able to reduce pretty dramatically their maintenance costs. Because if we think about it again intuitively, we're able to identify when that train in reality needs to be serviced rather than when we think it needs to be serviced. So they were able to cut down pretty dramatically on their maintenance costs. So those are just two examples. If you go on sap.com/Leonardo, we've got a bunch of other examples there. And I know we've got some upcoming talks and webinars that cover some use cases because I know there's a huge hunger for that. And we're getting them out there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, there's nothing like a good use case to put the audience's mind at work, imagining how this might apply. And so the audience has also asked, okay, it's SAP. How much of the SAP infrastructure do I have to have in order to run Leonardo on top?
So, now we're conscious that there's going to be some good value if you are using some of our technologies, but if you're not, there's no requirement to be using any of them. So that said, we've integrated these technologies together. They're available via SAP Cloud Platform. You can go online and sign up for a free trial. The point is that this is independent of those investments, but if you have them, there's some natural and some very good integrations that already exist to speed up that process. But even so, even if you just have a bit of our technologies and some of other people's, the aim here, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, is to be open and that we realize that heterogeneous environments are normal and will continue to be normal, and that it can't just be an all SAP story.
Right. And then the audience goes on to ask, well, what is the minimum size of a company for which Leonardo would be affordable or useful or effective?
I mean, all of these are on modern subscription-based services. So if you go online, it's pretty easy to get started, and we wouldn't discourage any sized company from using these. In fact, we think that it's a pretty great value proposition for particularly mid and small sized companies that just can't afford to go and buy a blockchain expert or a whole bunch of data scientists do some of this on their own. So this will hopefully give them a sort of running head start towards being able to leverage some of these technologies and do so in a very cost-effective way. That said,
well, thank you.
Very large companies are also leveraging this, as you'd expect. So it's a pretty broad story.
Right. Thank you. Guilherme, to come back up kind of the top of your project, one of the questions the audience raises is about the sort of resistance or organizational change elements that you had to deal with? Was everybody on board from the beginning, or did you have a lot of selling to do?
That's a good question. I believe that in every organization, no innovation idea is adopted from the beginning by everybody. Okay, so we did had some resistance. Especially, I believe it was more on a cultural base, on a mindset base, because the ones that felt the most the need, they were the early engagers, okay, because they saw the benefit. But the other people that were typically doing their daily routine, they didn't see the value, or they were thinking that we are providing something just as the same, but just a different screen. So they didn't understood exactly the value or why they had to do this, or they had to answer so many questions on the design thinking process. So the cultural resistance and the mindset change, I believe, in every organization is the preliminary barrier we need to change. And also, we had to do a convincing to the leaders, okay? So one of the key points for us to get this, support for the project was engaging the head of the surgery department that also responds for the ICU. So the professor understood the challenge. He saw that this as a benefit, and because of that, all the other people behind him understood that it was something that they had the support from the hospital management, okay, and especially the key leader that it was the professor. And I saw this as a learning process too, that if we need to do something that is really key on the change, you need to have the right sponsors inside. You need to have the right people to support you. Because the resistance sometimes that is cultural, that is personal, sometimes technology-wise. People say, we don't have time to do it. This will be overcome because the leadership makes them understand how important it is.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I completely understand. David, last question to you, and that is the audience observes that SAP seems to be a little late to the AI game. Why did it take so long, and why? And fortunately, you settled on TensorFlow and not an SAP proprietary package.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so the one to underscore here is that SAP has been working with machine learning for a really long time. It's just we haven't talked about it very much, both at the heart of operational applications, so like logistics planning, and we've also been in the predictive analytics game for a decent amount of time as well. But, we're conscious that customers require really robust and enterprise-ready products and have to be able to ensure that they can scale to really big sizes because of the size of companies that we work with. So we first wanted to make sure that we had some prerequisites in place and making sure that SAP Cloud Platform was really ready for the heavy loads that machine learning can generate at scale. We were also working with a bunch of industry partners that we didn't talk about today, but we're close partners in close relationship with Google, with NVIDIA, and at CEO levels. So being open to the things that are happening in the community is really important to us. And so TensorFlow has captured a lot of that mind share, and we found it to be a really powerful, and of course it's open source library that's a good fit for a lot of machine learning needs. Not all of them, but for a lot of them. And so we're using both theirs as well as others, as well as our own, depending on the best applicability.
Well, David, Guilherme, thank you for some great answers to some very good questions. And for those of you that asked questions today that weren't answered, we'll send those all along to David and Guilherme and the SAP team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. I have just a few quick announcements. If you would please mark your calendars for October 17th. That's our next DSC webinar, which is going to be Building Better Maps with Data and Data Viz, which will be sponsored by Tableau. Also, remember that today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the home page of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close, and I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions. A special thanks to SAP for their sponsorship, and particularly to our speakers today, David Judge and Guilherme Rabello, for their insight into today's topic. This is Bill Vorhies. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on October 17th. Have a great day.